time doesn't exist? Well, maybe. Look, I know what you're thinking. This guy's lost his mind. And honestly, you might not be completely wrong. But here's the thing. I used to be just like you. I was absolutely convinced that time was real, solid, unchangeable. I mean, how could it not be? Time is literally the foundation of everything we do. It runs our schedules, powers our clocks, structures our entire lives. But then I stumbled across something. An experiment. Scientists took one of the most precise instruments humanity has ever created, an atomic clock, accurate to within 1 second over 13 billion years, and they did something that proved everything we think we know about time is fundamentally wrong. If you're skeptical, this video is for you. If you think time is real, I've got a question for you. What is time? Take a second. Try to define it. Go ahead. But here's the catch. You can't use the word time in your definition. Not as easy as it sounds, right? You might think of the passage of seconds, or the measurement of duration, or maybe the sequence of events. But here's the problem. All of those definitions secretly use the concept of time, and that's a fascinating paradox. We experience time, we measure it, we organize our entire existence around it, and yet we can't define it without going in circles. Imagine you had to explain time to an alien that's never experienced it. You might say it's what allows us to measure the duration between two events. But what's duration without time? You could say it's what allows us to order events from past to future. But without the concept of time, how do you even distinguish past from future? It's like trying to define left without any reference to right or direction. We just keep going in circles. And yet time feels so real. Every day we watch the sun rise and set. We feel the seasons change. We use clocks that measure time with incredible precision. But does all of that prove time actually exists? Or is it just a way our brains make sense of change? A trick, an illusion. Some scientists, like Carlo Rovelli, argue exactly that. Time doesn't exist as a fundamental quantity. It's an illusion, a mental construction we use to organize our perception of change. But how do we get to that conclusion? To understand, we need to dive into modern physics. In the early 1900s, a guy named Albert Einstein completely revolutionized our understanding of the universe with his theory of relativity. He showed that time isn't absolute. It's not the same for everyone. Time is relative to the observer. That means time can flow differently for two people depending on their speed or the gravity they're experiencing. But wait, we'll come back to that, because right now, we experience time. We feel it passing. Our brains are incredibly sophisticated machines, capable of perceiving the world in complex ways. We have memories that let us recall the past. We have the ability to anticipate and plan for the future. But our sense of time isn't constant at all. Sometimes time seems to drag. Sometimes it flies by. Who hasn't felt like time crawls when you're bored, or races when you're absorbed in something you love? Studies in psychology show that our brains use internal mechanisms to estimate the passage of time. But these mechanisms can be fooled. For instance, when we're confronted with new experiences, our brains record more information, which makes it feel like time is stretching out. On the flip side, when we're stuck in routine, time seems to speed up. This suggests that time, or at least our perception of it, is largely a mental construction. But let's get back to physics. In some modern theories, like loop quantum gravity, time doesn't appear in the fundamental equations. Physicists are trying to unify general relativity, which describes gravity as the curvature of space-time, with quantum mechanics, which describes how particles behave at the microscopic scale. And in these attempts, time disappears from the fundamental equations. It's no longer an independent variable, but an emergent property that appears when you look at complex systems. What this means is that at the most fundamental level, time doesn't exist. It emerges from the interactions of countless particles, the same way temperature emerges from the movement of gas molecules. It's a completely counterintuitive idea, but it's supported by mathematically rigorous theories. So if time doesn't exist at the fundamental level, what does that mean for us? Well, maybe time is an illusion, a way for our brains to make sense of the change happening around us. Because after all, without consciousness to perceive it, does time even mean anything? Some philosophers argue that time is a creation of the human mind, a way to structure our experience of the world. Others think time is a real dimension, like space, that exists independently of our perception. Okay, we've been talking about time at the microscopic level, but what about at our scale? Well, I think it's time I told you about that famous experiment, the one with atomic clocks. Atomic clocks are the most precise timekeeping instruments humanity has ever created. Imagine a clock so accurate that even after 13 billion years, roughly the age of the universe, it would only be off by 1 second. These clocks tick at a rhythm so regular you'd think they're measuring some kind of absolute universal time. So how do they work? Atomic clocks use the fundamental properties of atoms. Specifically, they use the oscillation frequency of electrons when they change energy levels. Take the cesium-133 atom, often used in these clocks. The electrons in this atom oscillate at a precise frequency of 9,192,630,1770 times per second. By counting these oscillations, you get an incredibly stable and precise measurement of time. These clocks aren't affected by variations in temperature, pressure, or other external factors that might mess with traditional mechanisms. They rely on fundamental constants of nature, making them virtually infallible. But what happens when you move one of these clocks? That's where things get interesting. Imagine we have two atomic clocks, perfectly synchronized. As long as they stay side by side, they always show the same time. But if we take one of these clocks and move it even just to the floor above, something surprising happens. After bringing the clock back to its original position and comparing the two, we notice they're no longer perfectly synchronized. A tiny difference, infinitesimal maybe, but measurable thanks to their extreme precision. Two clocks, functioning identically, no longer show exactly the same time. Do you understand what this means? If time existed in a universal, absolute way, like an unchanging backdrop on which all events in the universe unfold, then these two clocks, however perfect they might be, should always stay synchronized, no matter where they are or how they move. But that's not what we observe. So what are these clocks actually measuring? This experiment reveals that time is not universal. If even the most precise clocks in the universe can't stay synchronized when subjected to different conditions, then the very idea of absolute time is called into question. And that has profound implications. It seems there's no common time for everything that exists. Instead, each object, each being, each clock has its own duration, its own rhythm. Each clock lives its own time, influenced by its environment, its movement, its position in space. But does it make sense to think there are an infinite number of different times, each attached to a clock or an individual? The problem is, this idea quickly becomes unmanageable and raises more questions than it answers. And that's precisely why physicists arrive at a stunning conclusion. Time, as a universal quantity, does not exist. Now you might be having trouble believing me. Let me help you out. I'm going to tell you one of the most famous paradoxes in modern physics. Einstein's twin paradox. Imagine, back in the 1920s, two identical twins. At the start of our story, they're the same age and in the same place. One twin decides to take a trip into space aboard a spacecraft capable of reaching speeds close to the speed of light. While the traveling twin explores the far reaches of the universe, the other stays on Earth. After several years, the traveling twin returns to Earth. To his great surprise, he discovers his brother is much older than him. For the traveler, maybe only a few years have passed, but for the twin who stayed on Earth, decades have gone by. How is this possible? This paradox shows that time doesn't flow the same way for everyone. Time is relative. It depends on how fast you're moving and where you are in a gravitational field. What we perceive as time is actually a subjective local notion, specific to each observer. Let's go back to our atomic clocks. If two identical clocks placed in different environments show different times, it means each clock is actually measuring its own duration, influenced by its movement and position in spacetime. For example, a clock located at the top of a mountain, where gravity is slightly weaker, will tick at a slightly different rate than a clock at sea level. This difference is tiny but measurable, and it's been confirmed by numerous experiments involving airplanes and satellites. This phenomenon isn't limited to atomic clocks or space travel. It affects our everyday technology too. Take GPS for example. If we didn't account for the effects of relativity on time, GPS position calculations would be off by several kilometers in just a few minutes. To ensure GPS works properly, it's essential to correct for these relativistic effects. These phenomena lead us to a conclusion that seems strange at first. Time is intimately linked to space and movement. It's not just an absolute backdrop on which events unfold, but a dynamic dimension that varies depending on the observer. So if time isn't absolute, what does that change about our understanding of the universe? Well, this is where Albert Einstein enters the scene. He revolutionized our conception of time and space with his theory of relativity. He showed that time and space are linked in a continuum he called space-time. In this model, time isn't separate from space. They're two aspects of the same reality. The desynchronization of atomic clocks isn't an anomaly or a measurement error. It's a direct consequence of the structure of space-time. Clocks that move differently or are subjected to different gravitational fields follow different paths through space-time, which affects the duration they measure. Ultimately, the atomic clock experiment shows us that time is much more complex than our intuition suggests. It's not a simple universal measurement, but a dynamic phenomenon influenced by velocity, gravity, and the very structure of the universe. But to truly understand what time is, we need to go back a few years. We're at the beginning of the 20th century. Up until then, Newton's laws allowed us to understand the world. Everyone was convinced we'd figured out almost everything about the universe. But in 1905, Albert Einstein published several revolutionary papers. One of them presented the theory of special relativity. How do I explain this? Imagine two people, Alice and Bob. Alice is on a train, moving at constant speed, and Bob is on the platform. According to Newton's laws, motion is relative. For Alice, it's Bob who's moving backward, and for Bob, it's Alice moving forward. Nothing surprising so far. But there was a problem that bothered physicists of the era: light. Experiments like the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887 showed that the speed of light is always the same, regardless of the motion of the source or observer. And that might not seem like much, but this little detail changes absolutely everything we thought we knew about the universe. If you throw a ball on a moving train, its speed adds to the train's speed. But with light, it doesn't work like that. Einstein decided to take this result seriously. He posed two simple but revolutionary postulates. First, the speed of light in a vacuum is constant, about 300,000 kilometers per second, for all observers regardless of their motion. Second, the laws of physics are the same in all inertial reference frames, meaning for all observers who aren't subject to acceleration. But these two ideas put together create a paradox with our intuition about time and space. If the speed of light is always the same for everyone, then time and space must behave in ways we never imagined. Einstein realized that, for this to all make sense, we had to completely rethink our conception of time and space. He discovered that time isn't an absolute universal value that flows the same way for everyone. Time is relative. It depends on how fast you're moving. This is called time dilation. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you, compared to someone standing still. Imagine you're traveling in a rocket at a speed close to the speed of light. For you, everything seems normal. Your watch ticks at its usual rhythm. But if you return to Earth after this journey, you'll discover that more time has passed on Earth than for you. In other words, you've aged more slowly. But that's not all. Einstein also discovered that moving objects contract in the direction of motion. This is called length contraction. At very high speeds, close to the speed of light, a spaceship appears shortened in the direction of its travel to an outside observer. Again, it's counterintuitive, but it's a direct consequence of Einstein's postulates. But now we're going to talk about an even deeper concept: space-time. Einstein realized that time and space are intimately connected. They're not separate entities but two faces of the same reality. It's not entirely accurate, but you can think of it as a big, flexible fabric. Massive objects, like planets and stars, warp this fabric. It's this warping that creates what we perceive as gravity. Kind of like if you placed a heavy ball on a trampoline. The fabric sinks around the ball, and a marble you roll on the trampoline will roll toward the heavier ball. Not because it's attracted, but because the ground has deformed. And what about time in all this? Well, Einstein demonstrated that time is affected by gravity. The more an object is subjected to intense gravity, the slower time passes for it. This is called gravitational time dilation. For example, time flows slightly more slowly at sea level than at the top of a mountain. It's tiny but measurable with ultra-precise atomic clocks. And this isn't just theory. Clocks aboard satellites run about 38 microseconds faster per day compared to clocks on the ground. If we didn't correct for this difference, GPS systems would accumulate errors of several kilometers per day. Okay, all this is great, but what does it mean for us? Well, first, it challenges our intuitive conception of time as a universal constant. Time isn't a river that flows uniformly for everyone, but a dynamic phenomenon that can vary from place to place, from observer to observer. Next, it has consequences for our deep understanding of the universe. For instance, it means that events that seem simultaneous to one observer aren't necessarily simultaneous for another. This is called the relativity of simultaneity. Imagine two lightning bolts striking the ends of a moving train. For an observer on the platform, the two bolts occur at the same moment, but for a passenger on the train, positioned toward one bolt, it will seem to occur before the other. It might seem strange, but it's a direct consequence of special relativity. These discoveries opened the door to new theories and new questions about the nature of time, space-time, and the universe itself. They led to quantum mechanics, modern cosmology, and continue to influence scientific research today. All right, now that we've thoroughly covered the subject of time, there's still one point we need to address: time travel. Where does that fit into all this? Because we just learned that time isn't something universal, that we're each sort of on our own timeline. But is it possible to make this timeline deviate, to make it take shortcuts, or even to make it go backward relative to others? In other words, is it possible to travel back in time? I know deep down you've dreamed at least once about doing it. What if I told you that according to modern physics, travel into the future isn't just possible, it's a direct consequence of the laws of the universe as we know them? We said it earlier. The faster an object moves, the slower time passes for it compared to a stationary observer. Said like that, it might seem a bit abstract, but let me give you a concrete example. Imagine an astronaut in a spacecraft capable of reaching a speed close to the speed of light. Let's say 99.5% of the speed of light. For him, time aboard the ship flows normally. He eats, sleeps, reads, lives his life as usual. But when he returns to Earth, after what he perceives as a 5-year journey, he discovers that several decades have passed on our planet. His friends have aged, society has changed, and he literally finds himself projected into the future. This phenomenon has been confirmed by experiments with subatomic particles in accelerators and even by atomic clocks aboard high-speed aircraft. But then, if traveling to the future is theoretically possible, why don't we do it? Because, as we said, for time to slow down significantly, you need to go at speeds close to the speed of light. The problem is that currently, our propulsion technologies are far, very, very far from reaching such speeds. Chemical rockets, nuclear, or even ionic, don't allow us to approach relativistic speeds. So traveling to the future is possible in theory, but in practice, we're absolutely not there yet. But I think what interests you most is traveling to the past. So is that possible? There, things get seriously complicated. First, how do we know if traveling to the past is possible? There's one person, one scientist who already asked the question: Stephen Hawking. He was a theoretical physicist who, despite a degenerative disease that eventually left him immobilized, made major contributions to our understanding of black holes, the origin of the universe, and what interests us today, the nature of time. In 2009, Hawking designed an experiment to test the possibility of traveling to the past. He organized a party in a room at Cambridge University on June 28, 2009, at precisely noon. The room was carefully prepared. There were decorations, champagne, appetizers, and a big banner that read, "Welcome Time Travelers." Oh yeah, and there's one important detail. The invitations to this party weren't sent out until after the date of the event. Hawking published the invitations in newspapers and online the day after the party. The idea was simple. If in the future time travel became possible, then time travelers could come back to this date to attend the party. But on the day of the party, Hawking waited patiently, champagne glasses ready, but no one showed up. The room remained empty except for Hawking himself. This apparent failure led him to conclude that time travel to the past was probably impossible. But what can we take from this experiment? Well, several things. First, that time travel to the past may not be possible. At least we have no proof of it. Next, travelers from the future could simply choose not to reveal themselves to avoid creating paradoxes or altering the timeline. Finally, there's the idea that time travel wouldn't allow you to go before the creation of the first time machine. It would be a bit like saving a video game. You can go back in time in the game by reloading a save, but you can't go back before the first save. Basically, if such a machine were invented in 2100, it might not be possible to travel before that date. After this experiment, Hawking formulated the chronology protection conjecture. According to this hypothesis, the fundamental laws of physics prevent the formation of closed time-like loops, and therefore travel to the past. Hawking suggests that quantum effects, such as vacuum fluctuations, would intervene to prevent the formation of these temporal loops as soon as they began to form. These effects would make space-time unstable under those conditions, preventing travel to the past. Causality, the principle that a cause always precedes its effect, is a fundamental pillar of our understanding of the universe. Allowing travel to the past could lead to paradoxes like the famous grandfather paradox, where a traveler goes back in time to prevent the birth of their own grandfather, creating an insurmountable contradiction. Hawking's conjecture proposes that the universe naturally protects causality, avoiding all paradoxes. Some physicists, like Kip Thorne, have theoretically explored time travel via wormholes, tunnels connecting two distant points in spacetime. Thorne showed that under certain conditions, a traversable wormhole could allow travel to the past. However, most theorists recognize that the limitations imposed by quantum physics make these scenarios highly speculative and probably impossible to realize. Whatever the case, time is at the heart of our existence. Yet we don't always realize just how much the true nature of time upends everything we think we know. Understanding time might mean grasping one of the deepest mysteries of the universe, and that could change absolutely everything. Imagine for a moment that time is like a book where each page represents a specific moment. According to the block universe theory, the past, present, and future all coexist simultaneously, like the already written pages of a novel. We're just turning the pages, believing the story unfolds as we go, when in reality, every event is already fixed, immutable. In this conception, our future would already be written, and our free will would become an illusion. We'd simply be characters following a pre-established script, unable to deviate from the traced path. But if everything is already written, what's the point of our choices, our hopes, our dreams? Fortunately for us, this theory doesn't correspond to what we observe in the universe. According to the theory of relativity, time isn't a frozen dimension where everything coexists simultaneously, but a dynamic property of space that depends on the observer. Time is relative, influenced by velocity and gravity. Each of us traces our own trajectory through spacetime, shaped by our movements, our choices, our environment. However, this vision might not be as joyful as it seems. If our experiences of time are unique, if our perception of past, present, and future is ours and ours alone, then in a way we each live alone in our own little world line.